Now, as we start to become a more relevant part of this kind of social encounter by creating just consequences for what we don't like out of them, right? We could see him controlling those impulses a little bit better, right? He's still going over and he's still kind of acting out a little bit with it, but it's not as intense as when I first let that second dog out, right? So this is kind of our job in social, right? Is we play lifeguard, right? All right, so what's going on with this guy?
He's a really good dog. He just doesn't get along with a lot of dogs.
Yeah.
It's mostly over toys or off-leash dogs approaching us.
Do you run into that a lot at home?
Yeah, because everyone has a dog or two, and everyone's dogs are somehow good.
Yeah.
And think every dog is friendly.
Yeah. Now, when you say he has issues with other dogs, you know, around toys, off-leash dogs running up to him, like, describe that to me a little bit.
So, I don't really, okay, so he's probably had like 5 instances where he's bit another dog over a toy that he thinks is his. So, I don't really allow toys around if he is around another dog.
Yep.
Right now we're living with someone that has toys all over the house, so it's just like, if he gets along with this, it's a big black German Shepherd, they're friends, it's one of the only dogs I let him socialize with.
So they get along?
Yeah.
Okay.
They like each other.
Yeah.
They share toys sometimes, but I tell the owner, I'm like, I mean, he's like one of my best friends, but I tell him, like, I really don't feel comfortable with this.
Yeah.
He thinks it's fine. Of course, everyone thinks it's fine until they see
Until it's a problem.
Attack their dog, and they're like, this is not okay.
Yeah.
Of course, I know. So yeah, he'll bite another dog over a ball. It's mostly ball.
And is it mostly we're throwing a ball? Okay.
I know. But I can't stop other people from throwing things. Because I've asked people, I've asked like, yo, no throwing things, like, and someone will always just throw a stick, and it's like.
And help me understand like where it's, just so I can get kind of the climate of like where you're socializing them and stuff like that. Help me understand the situations where it's happening. Like where is it that you've been like, hey, please don't throw something, and somebody throws a stick?
Honestly, the last time it happened, it was with a puppy, and I didn't allow them to meet. I was living with a roommate, and she said she took him out on a hike with the puppy.
Yeah.
He never asked for my permission, and I got home, and she was like, hey, something happened.
Okay, so she threw something when you weren't, okay.
The puppy's dad did. She didn't.
Understood. Yeah, understood. Yeah. Somebody did. Yeah. But you weren't there.
I wasn't there, he bit the puppy, and the puppy had to have surgery.
Yeah.
So it was a huge thing.
Sure.
And then he's bit a friend's dog over their owner throwing a stick. Because I'll introduce him to some dogs, and it's fine. It's fine for like, you know, half an hour, and then someone will throw something.
Yeah.
And
And when they throw, so you've seen it happen, I'm assuming, a couple of times, right? So when they throw something, they both just go for it, and they wind up in the same spot, and then boom? Okay, I gotcha.
And then the last instance that the last big one that he had was, I was living with my best friend for a year. Their dogs got along. Her dog is super submissive. I really only let him around super submissive dogs. And on Christmas Eve, I gave him his favorite toy, and he was laying down, and the toy was like in between his paws, and her dog came up, grabbed it, and he attacked her.
Understood. Okay.
So that wasn't even a throw. You know?
Yeah, I mean, it's a resource, right? The reason why the throwing of the resources is so much of a big deal is because in addition to it being this high value thing they want, you're also tapping into this prey drive instinct, right? So they're already in this heightened state of drive, and then they have the resource, as opposed to with a bone or something, they're typically in a calmer state of mind and have a resource, right? So you'll still see it there, but a lot of times it'll be more intense over a ball or something. And then you figure, right, one of the big things I tell people is all the time, the throwing balls is like one of the #1 places I see dog fights happening, right? And even with my personal dogs, it took me a long time before I hit a point where I could like throw a ball with all 4 of them together. You know what I mean? Like we could do it now, it's fine, it's no big deal. But I had to spend a lot of time basically individually teaching them to kind of heed to the other dog, right? If one of them was about to get it. So if I threw a ball and all of them went for it, usually it's clear one of them is gonna get it first, and I would teach the others to kind of back off to that when they noticed the other dog was about to get it. And that takes a lot of management to do. You know, know, it's even something now where like, if I were to just like go out the window and no longer enforce that anymore, it would start to eventually turn into a problem again. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of management that goes into that. And that's why I always say, you know, you could manage him very effectively, but let's say you throw a ball, he goes for it, he's doing nothing wrong, and he's gonna get that ball first, and then suddenly this other dog comes barreling over and jumps on him for the ball. Like, that's gonna turn into a fight no matter how much training you do with this dog. You know what I mean? So if we can't control the other dogs, things like that start getting difficult, which is why my general rule of thumb is that unless it's a dog that they're going to be living with, right? And realistically living with and is like yours, is gonna have the same rules as he's gonna have and stuff, there's no reason to have resources and stuff out. And I get the conversation of, you know, well, I can't really control what they're doing side of it. I get that to an extent, you know what I mean? But I'll tell you, if I had a friend that had a dog that was like coming over to play, and you know, I had a couple really simple ground rules, like, hey, just please don't throw a ball or throw a stick, and they were repeatedly still doing it, that is somebody I would no longer let their dog come and play with my dog. You know what I mean? So, because all it's doing is showing, and this is the real important side of things, right? If we're in situations like that where we can't control repeatedly with our dog, which there's situations I can't control with my dogs, but I keep them out of those situations typically. Every time our dog sees us not be able to control a situation, it puts them more and more and more in a position where they have to control that situation. You know what I mean? And that's kind of the problem with it, is you lose so much trust from your dog as we repeatedly have them in that scenario. So I'm not saying, like, there's definitely a lot we're gonna have to do with him and improve on those skills and teach him some boundaries and stuff like that, but some of that is going to be, we gotta take charge over those situations a little bit more, whatever that looks like. You know what I mean? So, all right, so what I want to do today with him is we are going to just get into some basic leash communication and stuff today. We're kind of going to be assessing where he's at with stuff. We may do a little bit of dog-on-dog socialization today. I want to just get a read for what do we need to work on this week with him.
And my boyfriend lives in a really super small ski town. It's really hard to bring him anywhere because there's no such thing as leashes in that town.
Yeah.
Like and there's dogs everywhere. And there's balls being thrown all over town.
Yeah. Situations like that are very, very tough. You know, I work with a lot of people, both here that are like moving places like that, or I work virtually with a lot of people that live in those types of areas. And it just, you know, it's unfortunate because it's not really our fault, obviously. But it adds another level of responsibility on our plate as far as us being just hyper aware of our surroundings. You know what I mean? Like with that kind of stuff, like we know these people aren't gonna follow the rules when it's concerned. And if it really is literally everybody breaking those rules, like it ain't gonna do any good to be like, 911, like, hey, go ticket these people, you know what I mean? Because they're not gonna do it to everybody, obviously. So we just have to take it upon ourselves, like with the best offense is a good defense. And, you know, there's places around here, for example, that are like notoriously the dog parks, like the dog parks, you know what I mean? Where everybody lets their dogs off leash, you know, nobody is responsible in the slightest. And when you go into those environments, you just gotta be very aware of what's going on around you and just predict the things from happening before they happen, you know? It's kind of like, I had a client use this phrase like years ago, and it like stuck with me ever since. She said, yeah, you're basically teaching people how to like defensively walk. You know, they say like defensive driving, right? It's like we're defensive walking, right? We go out and about and it's like, oh, this person is out of control over here. So I need to swerve this way a little bit and get out of space in case that dog tries to run over this way or whatever, you know? You just gotta kind of always be in that mindset, and then always be in a position to make sure if you then run into that freak situation where a dog does rush up to us, we could guarantee that dog is not gonna make contact, right? So that means you might have to start carrying something on you. Some people will use things like a, you know, like a pet corrector, which is like a can of compressed air, where let's say a dog starts running up from over here, I could put him behind me and give a spray with it to get that dog to go away. Some people will literally use, I think I learned this from our boy Cesar Milan. He used to walk with a walking stick, right? And use that as like, stay away, you know?
I do a lot of ski in the summer a lot. I ski every month.
Ski pole, there you go. So you know what I mean? Like you just have to get creative, right? Because again, if we accept I can't control this stuff going on around me, he's gonna take that upon himself, right? We have to take control over those situations, even in the scenarios where things are out of our control, you know? little sniffing. You can tell a little concern. You kind of see the lip a little bit, right? So this is obviously why we use the muzzle, because if we didn't have it on, we would have to intervene right away, right? We'd be like, hey, I don't know what's going to happen right now. We got to be, proactive about it. But in a lot of cases, growling, showing teeth, stuff like that, it's just a sign they're uncomfortable. You know what I mean? And for some dogs, it will progress. For other dogs, it won't. So we just got to see what he's going to do, right? The first step of socialization is figuring out like who is the dog, right? And you can see it flip from that like insecurity to curiosity, insecurity to curiosity. And when she comes in real hot like that, that's when you see him back away, the teeth kind of come up a little bit, so. So the important thing is obviously that we're just not letting him like glue up in one particular spot for too long, The important thing is that we're not interacting at all when he does that, because that would just reinforce then him being up against a wall next to you, right? But yeah, we could help kind of create some motion and stuff like that, which could ease the process a bit sometimes. A lot of times if they are uncomfortable, like they'll retreat back to their owner like that. We want to kind of just show them, hey, like you got to figure this out, So obviously the spike in energy, that's the next thing we want to kind of assess and see what happens, right? You can tell a lot of controlling behaviors, right? His instinct is go in and control that energy, right? The nipping, the biting, stuff like that. But we got to see what it's going to turn into, right? Again, that's why we implement the muzzle in these situations. Because our instinctual response right there is, no, stop it, right? Instead of see what is he doing, One thing I think we do a lot of socialization here, right, with dogs that have issues with other dogs. And one thing we kind of started realizing a long time ago is socialization, right? I think a lot of people misinterpret as either playing or aggression as like they're two separate things, right? As opposed to viewing them as like a spectrum. Because if you look at what is play, play is two dogs competing with each other, right? It's them trying to figure out who's more dominant than the other, or whatever you want to describe it, right? So if you look at it that way, you could even watch over the course of everything we're seeing right now, how intense it was to start. And it's still intense, but it's backing off, right? So it's moving on that spectrum down in the correct direction a little bit. And we'll see some dogs that as they go through this, like this may or may not in the next 10 minutes start turning into play. You know what I mean? Even the noises, like the growling, the tail up, the hackles, like all those types of things, right? All it is communication, right? And again, for each dog, it means something completely different. Okay. So. Yeah. What did you say? Is it in the other room? Will we get it? No, it's all right. No. So I just want to see how he responds now to if I step in and intervene and discipline for some of that kind of controlling behavior, and see if it progresses, if it backs off a little bit, kind of what we see with it. Now, as we start to become a more relevant part of this kind of social encounter by creating just consequences for what we don't like out of them, right? We can see him controlling those impulses a little bit better, right? He's still going over, and he's still kind of acting out a little bit with it, but it's not as intense as when I first let that second dog out, right? So this is kind of our job in social, right? Is we play lifeguard, right? Is this kind of making sense?
Yeah.
What do you feel like, what's going through your head right now?
I just think he feels really insecure.
big time.
A little left out, doesn't know what's going on at all.
Yep.
He's looking for a little bit of direction.
Yep.
I think he feels a little like, I don't know, just forced to be in this position and doesn't really know how to act.
Sure.
Kind of like the uncool kid at the party or something.
Yeah, for sure, right?
Yeah.
And the problem is, right, like he's been left to his own devices to figure out all this stuff, right? And he's learned a lot of bad habits with it, you know? Because he's, you know, it is coming, that's the big thing, is like this does come from an insecure place. You know what I mean? He obviously knows how to be social. He's been social with other dogs before perfectly fine. But when he gets overwhelmed, whether it's because resources are involved or because he's not getting any direction or anything like that, right? He feels like he has to go in and control those situations, right? And the problem is it's turned itself into those kind of dangerous behaviors that you're seeing, right? So
Even without resources.
100%, right? So like I'm assuming this is different than what you usually would see out of him. You're not used to seeing that type of behavior, right? Which is a lot of, for some people, when we put them in this situation, what's so shocking initially, right?
Yeah. I just don't put him in these situations.
100%.
So he's like,
Yeah.
why are you letting me do this?
Yep.
What's on my face?
That's a big part. You know, obviously the muzzle adds some stress, right?
Yeah.
But we're just seeing more of like the raw him in a new environment with new stuff going on, right? And he's learning how to behave better, but we're in a position to start giving some direction a little bit more effectively here. And the problem is, right, like dogs only know, they can only ever understand when we like what they're doing or when we don't like what they're doing. You know what I mean? So that's a lot of it, is just creating some boundaries for these things, right? You can't just go in and just kind of be the guy that goes and, because you don't like what's going on over here, be the one that goes in and steps in and controls that, right? And what you see is, again, on that spectrum, the progression of as this stuff starts happening and we create inhibitions for those behaviors, we put him in a position to open up more, right? We got a lot of work to do with him, obviously, right? But he's seeing these things that made him uncomfortable, like two dogs roughhousing and going wild over there. And he's learning that, like, I could just stay, you know what I mean? Like, if I'm uncomfortable with that, his go-to before was fight, right? Go control it. Right now he's learning, I'm uncomfortable with that. I'm just gonna go create some distance, or I'm gonna go stay by mom or stay by this guy or something, right? You know, and as the behavior gets worse, a lot of times we avoid it then for a while, which is why then once we go and like head on address it, where it's like just two other dogs, right, that are running and playing, how much that stressed them out initially, it's because we haven't been in a position to effectively put them in this stuff, you know? But now you can see, again, this dog that he was so controlling of before, right, now he's accepting coming and sniffing and interacting and stuff, right? So it's our job to make sure all dogs feel comfortable, you know what I mean? Like, obviously we want them to work out their differences, but ultimately I should be the one that steps in and says, hey, that's too much, hey, that's too much, so that all parties don't hit this point where it's out of balance and they start competing so intensely, you know? I think a lot of this issue, I think he has really high prey drive, you could tell, right? Yeah. The chasing, right, the high intensity stuff like that really seems to be a lot of the trigger. It may not even necessarily be resources specifically, but if you look at, again, the intensity he had when we let that second dog out, when they started sprinting across the room and his gung-ho instinct was run and chase and control that thing, right, is a very, very similar response to with the toys and stuff, you know? And you can tell as soon as the other ones start, like when this dog started ripping around, that kind of started getting him going again too.
Do you think I shouldn't play ball with him?
No. That's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
He just needs to learn how to control the impulse. You know what I mean? That's what we're teaching through this. Like this social, the biggest takeaway from this should be, obviously we're assessing where he's at, but how just, I think we gave 3 corrections, right, over the course of the entire thing for that kind of like uncontrollable impulse that he had, and how much better he was able to inhibit that himself over the course of the rest of it.
Yeah.
Like, even though he's still doing a little bit of the teeth and stuff like that, like you're seeing more of the real him now, which is just, I'm just nervous and don't know what's going on, you know?
Yeah.
Which is fine. That he could overcome. You know what I mean? This is good. I'm actually pretty pleased with what we're seeing here overall. I think we got something very good to work with here. And I think we just need to see him open up a little bit. Yeah. And in addition to that, I think you need to know what to look for as far as where and when to intervene with things, right?
Yeah.
And some of it is like fighting that internal, that's why it's funny when I asked you, I was like, how you're kind of feeling about everything. I could sense a little bit of the like feeling bad for him in the situation and stuff like that maybe, right?
Yeah.
Which I understand, right? I definitely do. But you know, it's okay to like feel bad in that situation and be like, oh, he's struggling right now. That's why he's acting this way.
Yeah.
But a part of us helping him overcome that hurdle is holding him to a higher standard. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even though you're stressed out, even though you're struggling a little bit through this, there's still things that you can't do that. You know what I mean? And as he starts to learn that you're going to provide that guidance and you're going to tell him what to be concerned about and what not to be concerned about, that's where you're really going to start to see him thrive. Because when he gets stressed, like he did a handful of times in there, he's going to start looking to you as opposed to looking to control.
Right, right.
All right, how are you feeling?
I feel like he was a lot more work than I thought.
Do you feel like you're just a little like, that was different than I was expecting?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I expected him to play a little bit more.
Be a little bit more social and stuff.
But I definitely think it has a lot to do with the muzzle because he just doesn't know
Yeah,
he's in it.
I think it's some of that. I think the environment plays a big role in things too. You know, like when they're more comfortable, they're in their environment. You know, obviously you see a little bit less of that, but you know, seeing the correlations between things, at least for me, right? Again, like what you've described as his behavior, as far as again the ball, that creating a lot of kind of high intensity and stuff like that. You mentioned a couple of times, you know, he likes submissive dogs more and stuff like that. That's because he doesn't have to prove himself as much to those submissive dogs. I mean, so you're not going to see as much of that kind of stuff. I think a lot of it is just you haven't seen as much of that because you've done a very good job of proactively just managing things.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So as we kind of put them in more just like organic situations like that, I think you're going to see more stuff like that. It's fine, right? You know, it's obviously, you know, we saw some good strides as far as being able to work him through those things and how he responded to stuff. So now it's a process of once we could kind of inhibit some of that response that he has, it's just letting him open up. You know, like I want to see him just be exposed to that more and behave himself and just start to realize it's not that bad, you know? So we'll be focusing a lot on the socialization over the course of this week, obviously. From an obedience standpoint, all that looked awesome. You know, he did very well. He took to the things that we worked on with him very, very well. So I'm pleased with that overall. You have any questions on that side of things?
I just want to know your opinion. Do you think he's an aggressive dog?
No. Here's the thing, right? So like if you look at his behavior that he was even exhibiting, even at his worst in there, right? It wasn't, I'm trying to like attack and kill this dog. It was just, I'm uncomfortable and trying to control this situation. Now, that could turn into aggressive behaviors, right? But at his core, he is not an aggressive dog, right? An aggressive dog is a dog that has true intent to do harm. That's how I describe it. You know what I mean? And I do not see that out of him. I see a big scaredy cat that's learned for 8 years that when he gets scared, this makes the scary thing go away. You know what I mean? So that's okay, you know, and listen, you know, we get into realistic expectations of things. Like, we might not make him a social freaking butt, you know, we're not going to make him Theo in there, the golden retriever, right? But we could definitely get to a place where you could learn how to put him in more situations that he'll be safer in and you feel more in control of that stuff, right? Where we can get him to open up a little bit more. So that's kind of my big goal with all of this is, can we get him to open up a little more, and can you kind of feel confident in learning how to manage those situations that you're seeing where it doesn't become problematic? It's like you don't realize it until you get started, but like you're overcoming your dog's hurdles, and then you start to realize as you go through the process, you're overcoming your own hurdles of as like you know, you've had him for 8 years, right? And you have this picture in your head of like who he is, right? And it's starting to shift a little bit. You know what I mean? Like you're kind of learning more about him and stuff like that. And again, that's not a bad thing. It's just different, and it provides, you know, it's just challenging. So.
Something that he struggles with still is the listening to the commands when the collars aren't on him. He still has like a really hard time with following through when he knows the collars aren't on him.
So basically for like a while, I don't have an expectation of the dog necessarily listening without the e-collar, right? Right now, like even even now, even when we finish the program, you'll figure he will have had 10 weeks of, you know, training and learning things and stuff like that, but that's still such a short period of time for him to learn a lot of new things, right? Additionally, right, behavior, whatever it is, whether it's commands, whether it's behavioral issues, whether it's any of those types of things, they're contingent on consistent reinforcement, right? So if we hit a point where we find ourselves in a lot of scenarios where it's like we're asking him to do something and we're not in a position to back it up and enforce it, you're essentially teaching him to blow you off when the collar isn't on, right? So my big thing that I tell everybody when it comes to getting a dog that's reliable with or without training tools is before we even have that as like an expectation, we need to position ourselves where 100% of the time with the collars on, he's like that, right? Like he's like perfect with it, right? Because what we're trying to do here is we're trying to make listening to these behaviors or commands habitual to him, right? And in order to create a habit, they have to essentially do it, but do it successfully for, what do they usually say, 30 days, right? 31 days, something like that. It's gonna take a while before you hit a month of like basically perfection with him. You know what I mean? So to that point then, how do we strategize and make sure this doesn't become problematic, right? Because obviously we don't want to be running into a bunch of scenarios where like he doesn't listen to us and there's nothing that we can do about it, right? And that comes down to predicting the places where you're needing to ask him to do things and making sure we're in a position to back them up when we do. And then in the scenarios where he doesn't have collars or anything on, really breaking that habit of even asking him to do anything that's like a formal command, right? Like even with my dogs, I would say that I've programmed myself at this point where if they don't have training tools on, or if I'm not in a position to reward for something or correct for something or whatever it may be, I've kind of trained myself to use nothing but informal commands, right? Meaning like if I need to get them to come to me in the house for whatever reason, I'm just using, come on, let's go. Something like that where like it doesn't matter if they listen to me or not. I could basically beg them with that all day long. And if they don't listen, they're not blowing off a known command, right? If I need to get them to stay in one spot, I'll kind of use like informal, dumb little like, wait, this, that, you know what I mean? Like stuff like that. Or just try to like avoid asking him to do anything at that point. I'll take a mental note of that scenario and be like, what was I doing? What did I need to get him to do? And then next time I need to do that thing, I'm gonna make sure that I preemptively put the collar on, right? And again, I've found, I say this to most of my clients, right? I found in my case personally that the 3 big situations that I just put the e-collar on just in case is people coming over, going off leash anywhere, or going anywhere public, right? Outside of those 3 scenarios, if we're just hanging out in the house, right? Hanging out in the backyard, stuff like that, there is rarely ever a time that I need to formally ask my dogs to do anything, you know? So then to follow up on that, to piggyback on that question, where would you find that you're running into that situation, if you could think of any particular situations?
Anytime we take him out, we have the collars on him.
Yep.
So I would say it's just in the house.
Yeah,
In the house.
really.
And around certain things, like are you doing something in particular where it's like it's not on and you need to ask him to do anything?
I like getting off the couch. Still can be a struggle sometimes.
He listens to me better with that. That's almost like an immediate.
And is the couch thing, is that something where he's not allowed on it at all?
He's allowed on it, but
He does this thing where if we keep a blanket on the back of it, he'll like pull it down and like burrow in it.
I gotcha.
And it's actually tearing up our couch.
Sure.
So we try to get him
Yeah.
to get down when he's doing that. But
Okay. So then I would look at that less as an obedience thing and like we need to work on this, and I would look at that more as just a behavioral issue we would correct. So instead of at that moment telling him, hey, you need to get off, I would just correct him for that thing and know, okay, cool, that's a predictable thing that he does, right? Even if he doesn't do it 100% of the time, even if he rehearses it 50% of the time when he's on the couch, he does it every other day or every 2 days or something like that. For a week or 2 weeks, we're gonna make sure basically anytime we're in the house hanging out with him, e-collar's on, it's set to a high level, and we're ready where the second that he goes to do that burrowing thing, we can just tell him no and correct. And again, I don't care if he gets down in that moment, right? We just want him to stop doing that thing and stop tearing up the couch, right? And then once you've had about a week, 2 weeks of success of being able to catch that a couple times and correct for it, and it actually go away, then you could start fading it out again in those situations, right? Because the problem with the mentality of just getting him off in that moment of like, hey, stop it, get off, right? Is it doesn't do anything to tell him not to do it next time. It just says, hey, you're doing this thing I don't like right now, right? I need you to just stop doing it now because I'm asking you to get off, as opposed to, hey, just don't do that thing, right?
He also does this dumbass thing that he barks violently at dogs on TV.
Yeah.
Which sets
I feel like you guys told me that before.
But
yeah.
it's starting to set off our little
Sure.
dog that she is attacking him.
Ah, yeah.
And it is like, it's actually like
Sure.
2 nights ago it was
very
bad.
Yeah. Okay, so that's, you know, it's funny. We just made a post the other day talking about like dog fights and stuff, and like commonly we'll see that it's over one dog that starts to correct the other dog for something we should be doing, right? So that's something else where in a lot of cases, and I'm not saying this is you guys, but we'll see some people that have dogs that do that, where it's like funny initially. It's like, what the hell are you doing? You know what I mean? It's like we laugh at it, whatever, this, that, but it can escalate into a serious problem like that. So that's another thing where instead of using any sort of command and saying go to bed or come or anything like that, we're just giving a singular correction for that thing, right?
Yeah, we had the collar on him the other night and he actually immediately stopped with it.
Yeah. So then the key is now we need to make sure that we're able to consistently catch that thing, right? So every single time that he rehearses it, we got to be in a position. It's always something interesting going on. We got to be in a position to correct for it, obviously, right? And then the second thing is we got to make sure the correction is then motivating enough where it lasts to the next time. So, you know, any of those types of things, what I want you to start looking at, no, sit, good. Okay, what I want you to start looking at is how do we actually totally stop those things where we don't need to ask him to do something to avoid him doing it, right? Because again, like just a lot of people take roundabout approaches to it where they'll, instead of correcting the TV thing, they'll, while they're watching TV, do like a bed stay or like, and they call it an incompatible behavior, right? Meaning something where if he's doing that, he can't do that. And all it is management, right? All that is like, well, every time we watch TV, we're gonna have to do that or else he's gonna rehearse that behavior, right? Where I always say like long term, like with my dogs, like I want to micromanage them as little as possible. I want to take those things that they do that I don't like. I want to create inhibitions for those things so they stop rehearsing them altogether. So I don't care if you lay over there or do this or do that or do that. Just be a dog. Just don't do those couple of things that I've told you not to do, you know? So try to pay attention to those things. And if there's a couple things, is there anything else aside from those two you could think of?
The vacuum.
Yeah, the vacuums.
We have to put him in his crate when we vacuum.
Okay, so again, right, so we need to look at then, that's another issue we want to just stop, right? And we can take a look at the vacuum a little bit today if we think he's going to do it. But
the second he sees it.
yeah, so moving forward, right, starting today, if you guys are going to vacuum, and you're going to set up some training sessions doing this, right, you're going to have him out, you're going to have the e-collar on, you're going to have it set probably pretty high, right? And anytime if he goes after that vacuum cleaner, you're going to correct him for that, right? So we're creating an inhibition as opposed to managing him with the crate, right? Because those are the little details. That's the important shit, right? Like the commands and stuff are important, right? They're good for management, and they're good for, you know, if we're having a bunch of people come in the house, get them out of the way, or we can give them off-leash freedom and do all those fun things. But when we look at day-to-day living with our dogs, the important shit really is, does he just not do those handful of things that led us to training in the first place? You know what I mean? So I want you to start kind of chasing those things, right? If those three are the big ones, we're going to set up a session once a day where we pick one of those three things, we try to simulate it so we could actually stop it, right? Yeah. And 9 out of 10 times they act like that because they are scared of it, you know what I mean? The problem is they've learned fight as their option as opposed to flight at home. So we kind of need to just reteach that to him, right? If you're scared of it, that's okay, right? I get it, right? But instead of going after it, just go somewhere else, right? All right. So it looked pretty good, and honestly, he wasn't overly flighty of it either, you know? Like he was scared of it, he was trying to get away, but he wasn't like over the top. So what we're gonna do next is we're gonna get him onto a bed, and then we're gonna kind of do it around the bed. Franklin, bed. Walking right over it. That's pretty impressive. We've never done any here before. A lot of times, first time we do it in a new location, they're a little apprehensive about it. All right, so give them a second there. So I'm gonna start with the vacuum off, just kind of moving this thing around.
You're embarrassing me. I said that you did this and now you're not doing it.
And you know, obviously, again, there's a big difference between how a dog responds here versus at home. You know, a lot of times when they come somewhere like this, we'll see more the real dog, right? The unaltered version of them, right? Which is he's just scared, right? He was scared of it, right? He got scared of it and he moved away from it, right? The problem is at home, there's all these like artificial things that we've done with the dog that kind of embolden them and make them a little bit more confident to rehearse in X manner when they're scared. You know what I mean? So that's why, again, here, you know, he's scared. At home, he's scared and has learned to like aggress on it, right? So that just means we need to block that pattern, right? When he is around it, we need to reteach, or I should say unteach what he's learned to do when he's scared, right? Yep. Then you look at like the management side of things, right? A lot of times how we'll see this stuff progress is it starts where like, you know, maybe when you first got him, he was scared of it and did kind of try to get away from it and stuff like that. And then one day he learned he could bark at it, you know, and then started barking at it. And maybe in that moment, we put him away, right? So what happened is we taught him when you start barking when you're scared will remove you from the situation, right? And what happens is that being removed from the situation is extremely self-reinforcing, right? It feels good, right? That's what he wants. He wants to get away from that thing. So then he just starts getting more and more intense with it until you start doing what it is that he wants, which is getting him away, right? So that's kind of how those things will get taught in the first place. And it may not have even been you guys that taught it. It may be his foster that taught it or whatever, right? But that's how we'll see that progress. But again, back to the original point, very, very, very easy things to solve, right? You should be able to get that under control right away. I think that was pretty productive. I think really today, more than anything, getting into some of those key points of stuff to work on, like outside of these commands, I think is the most important takeaways from today. You know, again, the stuff when you're working out, the TV stuff, the couch stuff. Was there one other thing? Vacuum stuff, that's it. Those 4 things, if you can get those 4 things like under control this week. Atlas, what are you chewing at the bars for? If you can get those 4 things under control this week, that's gonna go a long, long way, right? As we chip away at those behavioral issues, it's crazy how much like relief we start to feel like in the house as far as not needing to feel like you're like on your A game all the time, you know? Because you're not managing as much, you're actually solving the problems, right? So I would really focus on those things. Additionally, when you're working your commands and stuff, I would like to, I do that all the time. I would like to see you start to just give them a little more time in between those corrections. Yeah, I mean, I think that would be it. And then I would say with you, like if you're in a new place, just less of an expectation. If you're used to doing it from 6 feet away at home, do it from 3 feet away at a new place or something like that, you know?
Sounds good. Yeah, I mean, even when we had my buddy in town this week, you know, he needed a couple corrections when he first came in the house.
Sure.
But what happened the last time we had people stay the weekend was like, he was panting and stressed out. And
Yeah.
Once we got him through like that initial of my friend coming in the house, totally fine.
Awesome.
0 issues.
Hey, give him direction through that stress, you know? So that's fantastic. So we just want to keep doing that, keep chipping away at those last little things and, you know, keep him moving along. He looks really, I mean, he looks great. I mean, first time you guys brought him in here, he was a psycho.
Yeah.
You know, he's come a long way. I mean, that dog going through, that was awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty pleased with how he's looking so far. All right, so we're gonna kind of cruise a little bit here. I'm gonna have you just kind of roll with him, and I'm just gonna be paying attention to just kind of how you're handling this, and we'll make some tweaks as we need to. So what we'll do, so as this car goes by, we'll walk this way, hop on the path, and just start making our way around it, and I just wanna see how you're walking him. So you said in general, the walk itself is a little sloppy, and then when he sees distractions, it just gets really sloppy.
It's like it's like he'll get ahead of me, and I'll say no and give him a sec, and then I'll shock him, and he'll come back. But then it's like he doesn't learn from it. He just keeps going back to the same thing.
Now, when you say you tell him no, and then you give him a second, then you give your correction, are you giving him a second to figure it out before you give a correction? Is that what you're doing?
I'll say if I go. I mean, I try to give him.
So you're giving him an opportunity to fix himself before giving a correction.
Yes.
Understood. So that's where a lot of your mistake is. Okay. So if we say no, that's under the assumption that he's already made the mistake, and we want to always reinforce with the correction if we say no. Right? So there's never a time I'm going to say no without that correction, because the goal is not that we say no and he fixes himself. The goal is that we don't have to say no in the first place, because he stops making the mistake, right? And he learns to stop making that mistake by the correction consistently coming when he makes it, so he could learn to avoid that, right? Now, additionally, once we've checked the box that we're correcting consistently in the right spot, at that point, if we're running into a situation where we're telling him no and correcting, and then he fixes himself, then makes the mistake again, and it's just like that cycle right there, that means he doesn't care enough about the correction then at that point. And that was the biggest thing we noticed when we came here, when we were passing dogs and stuff, is that level went from like him just working at like a 30 for like just walking and stuff like that, to him being at like a 70, 80, 90 for the distractions, because his arousal level went so high up, right?
So like right now, like he's got a little bit of tension.
Yeah.
But it's like.
Yeah. So ask yourself this question, right? So if that leash wasn't on him, what would he be doing there? Because you said that, right? He'd be still off going, right? So we don't want to be like, well, there's just a little tension, so we're not going to correct, because he's already made the mistake at that point. The leash is what's holding him there, and we should always be going into these situations with the expectation that if that leash wasn't there, would he still be listening, right?
Okay. So like right now then.
Yeah, if he's pulling, I would tell him no. Tap your butt.
No.
Perfect.
Come.
Excellent. So I would say, as far as that level was concerned, that he didn't care that much about that. So let's go ahead and increase like 10 higher than whatever you're at. So it's that twofold question of, are we correcting in the right spot, and then does he care enough about the correction? Those are the two things you got to be looking at here to get this under control. And the positive is, again, this is usually a pretty easy fix, you know, once you kind of start making those couple little tweaks.
Just been, you know, we go on walks together, and I'll have him, and he'll be pulling up, and Emma takes him, and it's perfect. Yeah. And he's just kind of learned the boundaries with her, you know. She's been consistent and motivating with him about those things. So, yeah, he'll get that way with you, no problem. Now, I don't mind, like, he's a little bit ahead of you right now, but there's no tension, right? He's holding himself there, obviously. There's no, you know, if the leash wasn't there, he would still be in that position. So I don't care too much about that. It's mostly when you feel like you've, like, lost him. Like, he's going off that way, or he's going off that way, where we would want to correct. Okay. Because, like, just yesterday or 2 days ago, he was getting probably, like, another half a foot or so out. But he was just kept looking back at me. I think he was just like, waiting for a shock, and I was like, I don't want to shock you. This isn't. Yeah, you kind of have to set in your mind what the expectation is. You know what I mean? Because for every dog, it's slightly different. Like my Malinois, like when I take him for walks, when we start the walk, because he's just so amped up, like he walks probably about how he's walking right now. You know, but there you go, perfect. Let's go ahead and increase even a little bit more. But he maintains that position perfectly. There's no tension on the collar or anything like that, right? So I don't mind it because he's still with me, right? Where my pitties, on the other hand, we start our walk and they're like there, you know? So I try to look at like the natural cadence of the dog and kind of make the call from there as far as if I should correct or not. Are they high energy as well? Yeah, I mean, they're a little high energy, but my one is getting a little older at this point and stuff, so she's slowing down and perfect. Now that correction, I felt like he cared about, right? So we're gonna leave it at that level. Now one thing you could do as well, give him a little more slack on that leash. So by having more slack on that leash, what's gonna happen, and maybe a little less than that, so that he can't step over it. By having more slack on the leash, you're gonna put him in a position where you're gonna see those mistakes more, because you're not gonna have that fallback of like, oh, I could just have a tiny bit of tension on the collar, right? Yeah, definitely
like I felt like we had some breakthroughs with his reactivity, and he wasn't pulling at stuff.
Yep.
But then the last couple times I've walked him, he's just,
Sure.
it's like he just took a big step back.
And that's just a stem from these issues, right? Once you get this stuff under control, you'll see that stuff kind of come down with it.
Okay.
Because the problem is when everything starts getting a little sloppy on the walk, then he starts getting back into that state of mind of just deciding, right, I want to go do this, I want to go do that, I want to try this, right? And the expectation is just skewed in his head, right? He doesn't know what it is he's supposed to be doing, so you see him resort back to some of those old behaviors then. And he's doing better right now because we tightened up the problem, right? That's why I wanted to have you walk him right off the rip, is because we were able to make those quick adjustments, and you see how rapid it is that he then fixes himself to that.
So like this, is this good?
Yeah, I would let that slide for now, because he's still with you, you know what I mean? Like, he's matching your pace and stuff, so. Try to not have those corrections be for these like tiny little nitpicky details that he's not gonna understand, right? I would rather wait until he fully makes that mistake and give a bigger correction for that and have him retain that better. How's that walk feel though? A little bit better?
Yeah, definitely. He was pushing the boundaries before. But like, you know, like I said, like he wasn't pulling. So
I got you.
It's like I feel bad shocking you for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just keep in mind, right, like you just have to ask yourself what the expectation is, right? Because if the expectation was don't pull, right, then we wouldn't correct for that, right? But the expectation is maintain a specific position. You know what I mean?
What if there's like he's just not, cause, I mean, I wasn't doing it right, but like,
Sure.
if he's just not getting it, because I tried like doing the stop, sit.
Awesome.
I tried doing the stop and sits with him, and then I even tried doing like the
Sure.
back up where he has to stay by your side.
Yep, yep.
It
So-
just wasn't sticking.
Good question, right? It always comes down to the expectation isn't clear enough or he isn't motivated about the consequence or the reward for it, right? Because he clearly knows how to do this, right? He's proven he can do it, meaning it is always a handling related issue at that point, right? You were kind of trying to use other ways to stop a different problem, right? So your problem originally was, he's kind of pulling a little bit, or he's not really staying focused in position, or he's getting a little reactive. And because we couldn't solve it by enforcing that position because it was unclear, you picked some other way to try to solve it, which was, well, we're just going to do some sits then, and maybe that will fix the healing, right? Or we're going to work some backwards walking, and maybe that'll fix the forward walking or something like that, as opposed to, again, looked at what handling related thing do we need to adjust to fix it. So it will, right? Again, it always is clarity or motivation. It's never not one of those two things, as long as we've checked the box that the dog knows what it is that we're asking them to do, right? Which, if you were telling me like, you couldn't get him to do it well, I couldn't get him to do it well in the session and stuff like that, that would be a different conversation. That would be, we haven't taught this well enough. You know what I mean? But 2 out of 3 are able to get it really good, meaning it's handling related at that point. So, and again, easy little adjustments for it, so it's no big deal. Yeah, I think, as far as your walking issues you were having, I want to see you make some adjustments with those things that we talked about. A little more firm on them and a little bit more consistent with where you're giving your correction, less relying on the leash.
Yeah.
You should be good to go with it, I like ones like that because, and I think I mentioned it in the video, like, I didn't know what I was going to do with that dog initially. You know what I mean? I had to kind of figure it out and see how he responded to different things and see how much pressure I needed to put on him versus how much I needed to let things slide. Like, I thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
And it's also a big point. I think sometimes we wait a long time before we start a social without realizing you just start it right away, You're not contingent on having this e-collar in order to do it, right? Same with Frank, the last dog we worked with, how they didn't have the remote initially. I had to work him without the e-collar.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
Really well.
Yeah, and even that German Shepherd, I don't know if you noticed, like I didn't use the e-collar at all at the end there,
Oh yeah.
right? Did you notice that?
No. I didn't.
Yeah, I had it on my neck the whole time,
Yeah,
but I
didn't
wasn't
know if you were
using it.
But she was so vocal nonetheless.
Right? So that was an interesting dog because that's a prime example of we were going in and fixing something more than we were teaching something, right?
Yeah.
So that dog, the reason why she was so good with everything except that, and I kind of remember that dog, and I remember the last session they did with Matt before they kind of pulled the plug, and I remember talking with Matt about it and him just basically being like, you know, the dog won't do a sit, it's because the owners aren't working with her at home or something like that. That had nothing to do with it, right? That dog was just frantically trying to avoid a correction, is what was going on there, right? That's why she would sit and then just get up and like run to me, you know, and just spaz the fuck out, right? So that's why first thing I needed to do, I'm sure I'm going to need to give a correction for it at some point, but I needed to eliminate the spazness, right? And get her just like, she just needed to chill for a second, right? And knowing that the lack of chill was not just her, it was her having an aversion to what we were doing and her just like desperately trying to avoid a correction is what led me to get her to chill without the e-collar, right? Now, there's some German Shepherds you'll work with, like we have this puppy one we're working with right now that we hadn't even done e-collar training, and anytime we would try to get this dog to do anything, he would just spaz the fuck out, like just German Shepherd spaz, right? Where we needed to get him to chill out by getting him to focus in more, utilizing higher corrections, obviously, but it's kind of that art of like when you look at the dog, right? Like, what does that dog need? This dog did perfect with these other things, but was struggling with that. That means it's not disobedience. It is not, she's not motivated enough about the correction, right? I talk all the time about clarity and motivation, right? That was a clarity issue, not a motivation issue, right?
She was confused.
Yeah.